Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be going over how to ask good questions. So what's the first thing? Well, that's what we're going to be going over. And why is it important? Why are we doing this? We now have over 22,000 students on the course, and we want to make it easy for everybody to get their questions answered. We can't get to all of the questions that are going to come up, so we want to make sure that every time you ask a question, it's easy for other students to answer it as well. You'll also find that the process of asking a good question will often solve the original problem before you even press the post button. Asking a good question is useful, and it will be appreciated if you're ever in a work environment or even in school. Back in school, asking a good question is useful. So what's the first thing? The first thing is we want good admin. We want to make sure that your question can be found and we know when to pay attention to them and when not to pay attention to them. So always mark your question with help or solved at the beginning of the title if you have no other way of showing that a question has been solved. So for example, if you go to a specific question and answer forum like Stack Overflow, you'll find that they have mechanisms in place to show that a question has been answered or not. We don't in our forums on Unity, and many other forums don't. So it's always useful to add in at the beginning of the title of your question to make sure that you say help or solved, so that people don't have to worry about looking at questions that have already been solved. Also use clear descriptive titles and correct grammar and punctuation and full sentences when you're actually asking the question. Those things are important to make it easy to understand what you're talking about, easy to find the problem, and easy to pass, because we have some even for non-native speakers of English who will find it much easier to pass full sentences than abbreviations or partial sentences. So that's the first one. Have good admin when you do a question, and don't forget to mark it as solved once the question's been answered. So you need to write a good description, and that means you need to describe the problem thoroughly. And the best way to do that is actually something from programming and from software engineering, is just format it as a bug report. So things in the bug report that you need to include are observed behavior, what you saw happen, the expected behavior, how the observed behavior differed from the expected behavior, what you want to happen, and then the steps to reproduce the actual occurrence. So how would you reproduce the problem to that step, to that situation, so that you can reproduce it on, say, on my machine or on somebody else's machine. And then a list of things you've tried out already, so that we don't duplicate our efforts by having somebody who wants to answer your question trying out things you've already done. Now, make sure you include all the relevant information, includes the errors and the warning in full. If you have errors and warnings, add them in full. Include the version information for the products you're using. In our case, it's going to be Unity. It's quite important. Version information matters a lot. Different versions will have different programming API, so that means they have different way of doing the same thing, and we need to know which version to look at to answer your question. Make sure you use screenshots generously to show the problem. Take the screenshot of both the entire window so that we can see your inspector and your hierarchy. Those are important information when you've got an object selected, as well as a smaller screenshot of the problem you're having itself. Sometimes a screenshot isn't appropriate, it's not suitable. Use your judgment to see whether you should use a screenshot. Most of the case, if you've got a visual problem in the game, a screenshot always helps, and it never hurts. Use a code hosting service. That's another really good tip. Not many general purpose forums are good to share code on. In Udemy, at least, the coding sharing is okay for one line or two, but it really breaks down when you have any more code to share. It's really not designed for sharing code. So use the right tool for the right job. Use pastebin.com or gist@github.com to share your code. It's all going to be syntax highlighted. Make sure you post complete files. Often we'll find that a student has had an issue in one line, but actually it's a syntax error that the student made 5 lines earlier. So make sure you include the complete file. However, you don't want people to read your entire file. So point them at the line that you think is the problem. If there's an error message, the line on which the error occurs should be available to you, and you should point people directly to that line. Screenshots are a reasonable alternative for code. So for example, automatic syntax highlighting can help guide you, and if you have a problem with that, it's much easier to take a screenshot of the automatic syntax highlighting in MonoDevelop or whatever IDE you're using than it is to see the same problem in a different editor online. So that's when a screenshot is a reasonable alternative. build a minimum viable test case. That's a really useful tool. It's essentially, you don't want any code in the code you're going to be sharing with somebody else to not be relevant to your problem directly. So code does lots of stuff. You'll have a file that does a bunch of different things, and your problem will be with only one aspect of that code. You really want to make sure that the entire code that you're going to be sharing with somebody else is only the code relevant to the problem. You need to make sure that what you're sharing still exhibits the problem, all right, and still has the problem. So it's a fully working piece of code that only includes code that's relevant to your problem. It's a lot easier to reason about small code samples than large ones, and it's easier for other people to find the problem as well. So the golden rule is write a question the way you'd like to be asked, and don't ask until you've tried 3 different things to solve the problem yourself. So in order to show you what I mean in practice, let's show you how I would write a bug report for a problem I have in Unity. So let's jump into Unity and take a look. So I'm in Unity, and my problem I have right now is I've got this object, this cube, and I want it to turn red whenever the ball goes through it. So let me press play and show you what I mean. Right now the ball goes straight through it, but the cube doesn't turn red. However, I've written some code in my change on collision function right here that should be changing the code red, and I'm not quite sure why it's not working. So I want to write a question to the Udemy forums to get some help from other students. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my Udemy forums right here, and I'm going to start creating a new discussion. So I'm going to click Add Discussion and give a useful title for my discussion. So the first thing I want to write is help. I want to make sure that this question has not been resolved yet, so I'm putting helped. When it has been resolved, when I'm done, I will put solved instead of help. I will edit my question and change it. Right now I'm just going to put and give it a useful English description title, which is going to be cannot change the material color from inside on trigger enter function. Now don't worry about the technical details of this question. It's basically irrelevant. I just want to show you the process of writing a good question rather than the technical details, right? These technical details, you're not expected to know what they are, what they mean, but you should get the idea of how to write a good question, the kind of structure it should have. So I'm writing a good title. So rather than doing that, I'm actually going to ask a question. So I'm going to say how to change the material color from inside the onTrigger enter function. Cool. Now I start to write the description of my function. So the first thing I want to do is describe what my overall goal is so that people know where I'm going with this. So now we can say what's the observed behavior. Now I can write the desired behavior. So let's this is quite a visual problem. So let's add a screenshot of what we mean. Let's jump back into Unity and add a good screenshot. To do that, I'm going to press play and pause immediately, and I'm going to step through the program. Here we go. Now we can see from the game that the two are intersecting, but I'm not getting a color change. So now I'm going to take a screenshot of that, of the entire game, while I've got my cube selected. So I've got a shortcut to take a screenshot. That's on Mac, that's Command-Shift-3. Use whatever screenshot tool you want. That's not very relevant. Now I can jump back into my game, add a screenshot just before observed, and click Insert Image, choose the file, go into my screenshots. I've got a bunch here, select the latest one, wait for it to load, and here we are. Now we have a screenshot of our problem in our question so that people know what we're talking about. Let's write a little bit more about in our description. What else do we have? We have observed, desire, steps to reproduce. Make sure it's spelled properly. You can see that my browser is highlighting my errors. I've got color, the American spelling for color. I'm going to stick with the American spelling for now. It's fine. And now I'm going to write down my version number, so make sure I include that information. So relevant information. Firstly, my Unity version. And I can find that out by going to my Unity editor, going to File, or rather to Unity, About Unity. It might be in a different place on the Windows Unity version. And I can see here that I've got 463F1. Jump back into Chrome, make sure Unity 4.6.3 F1, and the code. So let me add a link to the code for the cube. And then I can jump back into MonoDevelop and grab the code. Now, you're not expected to read this code, but I will tell you not all of this is relevant to our problem. So let's remove all the stuff that's not relevant to our problem, that could not cause the problem because it's completely irrelevant. So this stuff, for example, is irrelevant. This function is completely irrelevant, so we can remove it completely. And this line is now redundant, so remove that. That is the complete code we want. And we can get rid of comments that have no use. So save this, make sure that the behavior is still the problematic one. So let's pause, start the game again to make sure that it still occurs. Yes, and it does. The bug still occurs. We're expecting this cube to turn red, but it isn't. Then we can jump back into our code, select all of it, copy it, then go back into our web browser and go to a gist or a paste bin, and then paste the code in here. Make sure we have the right language for the selected. We want C# for Unity code. And let's write the name of the file, which is going to be change on collision.cs for C#. And I'm going to create a public gist, and I'm going to be taken straight to my gist, and I then can select the URL, copy the URL, and paste it in my question. So let's jump back into our question and add it here. Now you'll note that the URL isn't a link by default. It doesn't automatically translate URLs to links, so I need to link this to the destination as well. So I click link, insert link, paste our link, insert, and then that should do the trick. Now what else do we need? What's the final bit of information we need? We need to add what we've already tried so that people don't waste their time trying the same things. So I add this, and then steps tried already. And then I can say add a list, etc., etc. So now we've got a full question, a question which has a description, has a screenshot to show what's going wrong, has the observed and desired behavior, and the steps to reproduce it, and the relevant information, including the code, a link to the code hosted on a nice service where it's all going to be syntax highlighted. And that is a good question. And if you see this question, I will post it, and it will ask me to make sure to proceed. It might not do that for you. And then we should see our question in the discussions right here. Now, it is good practice to, instead of asking a question in the general discussion, like I've just done, ask it against a particular lecture. You'll be in the lecture, you'll be able to ask the question against the lecture so we can know which lecture you're currently on and currently working from. Now this is a complete question, and whenever somebody replies, so let me add a reply. Right, so now I've got my answer, somebody's answered my question. I will go back to my question, go edit, and turn helped into solved, and save. And now when people scroll by all the discussions, they will see that this discussion has already been solved, and they no longer need to pay any attention to it because the problem has been resolved. Okay, so that is it for now for how to ask questions on Udemy about this course and every forum. And really there's a secret to this. The secret is asking questions like this makes it more likely that you will find a solution yourself. In fact, asking questions like this, having a thorough, well thought out description with all the relevant information, means most of the time you'll solve the question yourself and you will learn something about it. So actually asking good questions makes you better at being a programmer or being a developer. So that's the secret. The secret is good questions help you learn. And finally, there's some great resources on how to ask a good question that are very thorough. How to ask on Stack Overflow is a great one. It's very concentrated and very focused. John Skeet's Writing the Perfect Question is also very good. He spends a lot of time answering questions on Stack Overflow, and he has a very good idea of what makes a good question. And finally, How to Ask the Questions the Smart Way is a really long-form resource that covers a lot of the topics we've gone through today, as well as many more, and it is an exceptionally good read. Value for money in terms of reading this, the time you're going to spend versus the time you'll save in the future is huge. So that's it. I hope you now know how to ask great questions, and you'll find it a lot easier to find help on Udemy, but also elsewhere. Best of luck, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.